Folks, welcome back to the show. My guest today is a gentleman by the name of Kyal Leest. He lives in Australia. He is a qualified nutritionist. He is a naturopath. He is a biohacker, and he is the founder of a company, a supplement company called LVLUP Health. Kyal reached out to me through my Facebook community asking if I might want to take a look at his BPC 157 supplements. And when I did, I was blown away by his formulas and the thinking behind them. And so I decided not only did I need to talk to him, but I really wanted to introduce you guys to him and the great brain that this guy has. I think his BPC 157 supplements, and among a few others, are among the best on the market, and he is really just getting warmed up. So he's got a lot more in store for us. He talks about his formulas. He talks about some of the other ingredients in the formulas and why they're there, and a lot of his thoughts on the research he's done on BPC 157. So if you decide you want to try his supplements, fortunately for the rest of us, he's not just saving it for the Australians. He is willing to ship internationally. So Kyal, to get your hands on his formulas, you can go to LVLUPhealth.com, and that's level with no E. So LVLUPhealth.com. You can use discount code NAT10 and save some money off that order. And that's it. If you want, looking to reach him, you can reach him through Instagram. I think he said is the best way to reach him, which is LVLUP Health. So this is a great episode. I learned a ton. I hope you will too. If you want to reach me, you know where to find me, Instagram or through my website, natniddam.com. Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Welcome to the podcast, Kyal. It is bright and early for me and kind of late at night for you. So thank you so much for making time to be here today.
You're most welcome, Nat. It's currently nearly 10 p.m. in Australia to your, I believe, 7:30 in the morning, 7-ish.
Yeah, 7 in the morning. So it's definitely, I mean, I guess in a way, it's easier on me to be up at 7:30 in the morning doing this than being at 10 o'clock. Is it really almost 10 o'clock at night where you are?
Nearly. It's 9:40 p.m., 9:36 here.
All right. So we're going to keep this tight and get you to bed. And not decent, but at least a less indecent hour. Get too rambly. So, Kyal, let's talk about you. This is going to be a podcast. We're definitely going to talk about peptides, which is definitely one of the favorite topics of the audience that listens to this podcast and one of my favorite topics. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about who you are, why you're doing what you're doing, because I know you have a story. And let's get the show.
Yeah, well, who I am now is I'm Kyal Leest. I'm a nutritionist, naturopath, and I'm the founder and director of LVLUP Health, which is a supplement company in Australia, in the Southern Hemisphere. One of the only companies, I believe, who sell peptides, BPC 157. And yeah, been doing really well with that. Lots of positive reviews, lots of sales. But before I became like the face of LVLUP, I was years ago a graphic designer. That's what my first degree out of university. But I had a complete life trajectory change when my mother got a diagnosis of breast cancer. So in order to help her and also to help myself, because it's pretty hard to hear a diagnosis like that. So you want to feel empowered. I pivoted my education towards nutrition, and it's been, no looking back since then. Nutrition was a great foundation. I learned a lot in my degree, but then, as I don't know what your institutes are like in Canada, but in Australia, they feel like the information is rather outdated. And for the intention that I had with that degree to help my mum with a chronic disease, it sort of didn't feel like it was going to give me what I needed out of it. It laid the foundation. You learn all your macronutrients, micronutrients, and that's really good. And for weight management, the degree was great, but I wanted to learn about cancer. Mm-hmm. So I became obsessed and tried about every diet under the planet that I could, from keto to carnivore to vegan to paleo to even like that croissant diet I've learned about recently and tried that, which is interesting. But
What was that like?
yeah.
I need to ask you, what was the croissant diet like? I've always wondered about that. I could eat croissant for a couple of weeks. That could.
I believe the guy was interviewed on Paul Saladino's podcast. I can't remember his name, but it's all around just removal of omega-6 fats and just concentration on high stearic acid as like a thermogenic fat. But yeah, that's a bit of a tangent away from my background. Yeah. When I did all these diets with my mum, I was in the trenches with her. I wasn't going to take away her bread and her pastas and all that without doing it myself. So we basically did everything nutritionally we could for her cancer. And this was an 8-year journey. Basically, she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, which usually is 1 to 2 to maybe 3 years. And she did end up passing. But in the process of her health journey, I, from a very young age, became obsessed with learning about cancer. And then when you learn what helps with cancer, you sort of learn what's good for an athlete is good for someone who's chronically ill. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the stuff I'd learn about for my mother, I would apply both to her in the forms of supplement and diet and therapies, but I'd also give it a crack myself. I loved learning all those things and trying them, and the number of audiobooks and podcasts and health summits and any source of information I could find. I basically just dedicated my life to becoming a full-time health researcher for her. So yeah, in basically a 3 to 4 year period when her health was declining, I hardlined, I mainlined and megadosed as much information as I could. And basically through podcasts like Ben Greenfield and Ben Bukowski, Dave Asprey, Dr. McCullough, I learned all these things which were off menu, so to speak, compared to what you're learning from a conventional nutrition degree. Yeah. And I think it was 2019, actually, after my mum had passed, these podcasts, John Francois was a guest on Ben Bukowski's podcast. Yeah. And that episode changed my life, really, hearing about the catalog of peptides, not just peptides, but SARMs and all these hormonal information that I'd never heard before in my life. And I'd been listening to a fair bit, but it was like opening Pandora's box. It was mind-blowing to hear all of these exotic compounds with different codes and numbers and what they could do. And you sort of didn't really believe it, but I had to try them. So that was the tangent of my mum's health journey and my nutrition degree. But during that process, I kind of burnt myself out really pushing to save her, and sort of did that at my own expense. And I caused my own health issues with adrenal issues, and then adrenal led to thyroid, and thyroid led to chronic fatigue and all that sort of stuff. So in the process, in that long, was probably 5 years intensively process of trying to help her, I learned so much, but also had a lot to fix after the fact. And even though she passed, there was that huge silver lining was the learning, and that insatiable appetite I had to try and save her, mixed with desperation, really, not to lose my mum. Yeah. Blessed me with these insights and the knowledge that I have now that for both health and supplementation. And yeah, that's gave me my purpose in life, really, as well. Like saving her, prior to that, doing graphic design wasn't really tickling my fancy. So actually becoming a healer and a health practitioner really changed the trajectory of my life. And where I am now with LVLUP Health, I have her cancer journey to thank for that. So that's my background. I used to work at a health and supplement store and a hyperbaric oxygen center as well. So that's sort of my background into health and what led me to where I am today.
Yeah, well, it's quite a story, Kyle. So for your mom, though, I mean, it sounds to me like, although she did end up passing away, that was 8 years after a diagnosis, which is 4 to 8 times longer than any doctor would have given her. So you must be able to help her along the way, nevertheless. But you talked about HBOT before we started recording the podcast. Did the hyperbaric oxygen, do you think that that helps her at all as well? Like
Yeah.
things that you
Mm.
crossed that did help?
Well, from my research and books like Thomas Seyfried's, for example, I learnt and sort of grabbed onto the concept that cancer is a metabolic disease,
Yeah.
and sort of use that model to try and treat her using ketogenic diet and hyperbaric oxygen with like intravenous therapies. Those were the things that I really felt moved the needle, and that was reflective in her blood counts. It wasn't necessarily any of the, she did still do the conventional therapies, the chemotherapies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
She didn't want the burden of her outcome to be on my shoulders solely. So she chose to do therapies like that and radiation, which I didn't want her to do. That was my opinion. I could be wrong about that, but I just wanted her to try and do it as naturally as possible. My ethos with it all is she's sick, she's toxic. Putting more toxins into an already diseased and burdened body didn't really make a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And in that obsession with cancer, you sort of learn how it might come about. All of the toxins, the heavy metals, the carcinogens, plastics, so many things. So when you learn about the problems, EMFs, glyphosate, you have to then, the next step is to learn the solutions to these. Like, how do you get rid of them? How do you mitigate it? How do you fix it? And these were the pieces that I put together that helped her. And now that I have Level Up, these are still the pieces that I'm trying to put together for people. Gut health's a huge one. One of the main products that I sell is targeted for gut health.
Yeah.
Liver health, I've got a liver health product, all things, all tools that I really wish I had at my disposal during that period of time when I was trying to heal mum, are basically what I've made now or I'm intending to make in the future with Level Up. Just instead of things that are underdosed, or there's a form of a vitamin or a herb that's not effective, or even like the quality. The quality is like the primary focus of every supplement Level Up makes, because I don't want people wasting their money. And worse, not just the money, is the time and the stall that you have in your trajectory to that end goal that you've got by taking something that doesn't work, or might be, how would I put it, unethically cut with something else, which is actually, unfortunately, quite widespread now. I'm in the industry hearing stories about substitutions, and they call it pixie dusting, where an active is just 1/10 of what they claim it to be to save money. So that is why Level Up is what it is. That's my principles as a person, and then Level Up takes on my principles. I'm not going to ever try and rip anyone off, because I've been the other side of the supplement company. I've been the consumer and I've been frustrated. So that's why Level Up exists and why I created the products that I've got now.
Yeah, no, and your product line is really impressive. I mean, as people know, probably from the intro, and the way we met is that you joined my Facebook community and reached out and went, and then sent me some product to check out. And when I looked at the labels, I was like, wow, like this guy's not messing around, because everybody thinks they've got a GI formula or even your Regenerate formula. You've taken the peptides and you've augmented them with very powerful other ingredients. And I think that what I love about that is so often, people hear about peptides like you did, like I did the first time. And it's like, it sounds like, this Pandora's box, as you say, of magical substances, which they are, but they can't do it all by themselves. And even, especially with gut health, I get, because BPC 157 is so amazing for gut health.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about what BPC 157 is. You and I are like, well, everybody knows BPC 157. It's one of I call it my desert island peptide. Like if I was on a desert island and I could have one peptide, it would probably be BPC, and then I'd have to have a bioregulator too. But anyway, regardless, it's another topic. But BPC 157 on its own can help people. But you need the other things as well. You need those other ingredients that support the healing, and not to mention the lifestyle change and the nutrition changes and all that stuff. So One of the things I kind of wanted to talk about as well, in addition to the peptides, and I mean, I think I know why you picked BPC 157 as your first star ingredient, as it were, but maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that as well.
Well, yeah, as you said, it's a desert island compound. You definitely want it. It's so pleiotropic in what it can do. And the big purpose for gut health was I am trained as a naturopath, and naturopathic philosophies say start at the root, treat the root cause. And from what I determined for all of that health journey I went through, gut health is probably one of the most upstream root cause interventions that you can try and implement to help someone get better. And from all the research, like in naturopathy, you learn a hell of a lot about gut health in that degree. There's things like licorice and glutamines and aloe vera and marshmallow root, and they're all good, but BPC is just so powerful with its ability to trigger all of these cascades and these growth factors. The BPC, when I describe it to people who don't know what it is, I describe it as like if your gut is a building site, BPC is like the foreman who's directing all of the amino acids and all of the minerals as to what to do. If you're taking like zinc carnosine or glutamine without the BPC, i.e. you're building your site without the foreman, you're not really sure what to do some of the time. Like you might get it right if it's a really simple project, but your gut lining is the size of a tennis court when you lay it out. So there's a lot of healing that needs to go into that. And the BPC, by triggering all the growth factors and transcription factors, things like your angiogenesis, the VEGF, endothelial growth factors, nitric oxide, the growth hormone receptor upregulations as well. Like it's just, there's so many mechanisms to that one peptide that it had to be the star ingredient. And then overlapping what it is, when you figure out what it's triggering in the angiogenesis and the regeneration, the healing mechanisms, I started by combining it with glutamine in earlier formulas because I'm like, all right, here's the instruction and here's the building block. But then the amount of glutamine you can fit in a capsule is so insignificant compared to the 10 to the 20 grams that you might need a day if that's your primary ingredient for gut health. So I just worked it with PEA, which for those who don't know, it's a very long word that stands for palmitoyl ethanolamide. PEA works synergistically as an anti-inflammatory with BPC. This is in the Regenerate formula.
Yeah.
And the whole rationale behind the Regenerate formula is for injury recovery. It didn't really matter where the injury was at the start because I used the arginate form of the BPC, which at the time, and I still believe it's the better of the three forms of BPC to use. I've combined it with that, and thanks to John Francois in your episode, I changed one of the actives from glutamine to sodium bicarbonate to buffer that pepsinogen. Yeah. And I believe prior to me actually owning Level Up as a company myself, there was one sort of back alley looking website in Australia that sold it, and they had BPC for sale, but as the acetate form. And that's the first time I ever used it. A naturopath I worked with in the HBOT clinic managed to get it for me. And even as the acetate form, it worked really well for myself and for my auntie who had some bile duct issues. There was a lot of fibrosis in there, and we used that as one of the main things in her protocol to help heal that. But even as the acetate form, I was so impressed with how well it worked that the formulator in me thought, well, if we've had this much success with what is marketed as 20%, 30% absorption, well, how well would it work if we just had this arginate form and then buffered it with the bicarbonate to make sure that both acid and pepsin are taken care of, and then combined it with a powerful anti-inflammatory that works similar to cannabis oil, and that's the PEA. It works on the same CB1, CB2 receptors as cannabis CBD oil, but CBD oil in Australia is just a big no-no. It's very banned unless you've got a script, and then if you have a script, it's so underdosed that it really doesn't do much. So PEA was the best of the anti-inflammatories that I could find in Australia. And the other reason why I used it for an injury formula is a lot of people, like athletes, for example, may have an injury. And if you have an injury, you have pain. So what a lot of people reach for is an NSAID. And PEA works on the same cyclooxygenase, COX-2 receptors. It's a inhibitor of cyclooxygenase, which is basically what all the NSAIDs do anyway. So using the PEA as an anti-inflammatory and a painkiller, it's an analgesic in its mechanisms, combined with the peptide to actually go in and work on the root cause of the pain. You're sort of working. It's worked really well for a lot of people, a lot of athletes, family, friends, and thousands of customers now in the 2 years I've been in business. So it's a pretty good formula, and was the first that I came out with.
Yeah. So that uses the acetate, or that uses the arginate BPC?
Arginate. The company that I got it from prior had the acetate, but I only use the arginate with LVLUP. Nice.
Okay. And so that's the regenerate. I've used that. I quite like that formula actually. And I've got a bottle of the GI repair, which I haven't quite used yet, just because I don't really have any GI issues, but I have a temptation to say, everybody could use a little GI love once in a while. So I'm going to have to kind of just get into it at some point. But I also wanted to talk a little bit. I mean, the other thing is that one of them, the dosage, I can't remember if it's the regenerate or the GI formula that you actually, is it 500 micrograms of BPC 157 per capsule?
Yeah, so the dosage for 2 capsules is a whole 1,000 micrograms,
which is
right. It's a whopper. It's a big dose, yes.
Yeah, that's what I think. Especially orally, quite often you kind of need those bigger doses to.
Exactly. Yeah, well, the GI repair was originally, I formulated it for a friend with Crohn's disease, and when I've heard people talking about it and looked at literature for IBD, you do need substantially more than your average person who's just had an injury or wants better brain performance with its dopaminergic and serotonergic effects. So having a product for Crohn's colitis, IBS, even like peptic ulcers, like all of the synergistic naturals in that work on pretty much every stage of the GI tract. There's zinc carnosine for the gut for people who have things like H. pylori, or they have gastroesophageal reflux disorder, GERD, or just so every natural I included in that is powerful in a specific region of the GI tract. And then of course you've got BPC in it, which works everywhere it touches. And then another peptide I used in that one, which I don't know if you've ever talked about before on your podcast, is it's code's AT1001, and its name is larazotide acetate. I first heard of this peptide from Ryan Smith about 2.5 years ago when I had my peptide binge of podcasts. I listened to everything John Francois and everything Ryan Smith at the time, and he mentioned it in passing, sort of on a podcast, as a zonulin antagonist. And zonulin antagonism just as a statement is a mouthful, and I don't know how many people would understand what it is, but zonulin, for those who don't know, is a protein which regulates intestinal permeability. The more zonulin you have, in essence, the more permeable, the more leaky your gut is. And what larazotide does is it is an antagonist to zonulin. So it prevents the binding of this zonulin protein to your intestinal epithelium and basically seals it together, keeps it tight, while all the other ingredients, the naturals and the BPC, work to heal that gut lining itself. And that was the rationale between combining those two together. And recently, it's not out yet, but the next production run of that GI repair will have KPV in it. The alpha MSH fragment will be added to that with the other 2 peptides. So hopefully the price will go up with that in it. But hopefully for anyone with really chronic gut issues and autoimmune bowel disease, that will be like the one go-to product for anyone in the world with those issues.
Yeah, well, so KPV is a beautiful peptide. It's this tiny little, 3 amino acids. So it almost, it almost gets into the bioregulator family. It's not. And it's about, as you say, it's about hitting inflammation in the gut. And it's very, very powerful for that. So I have a question for you, because this came back to me by a practitioner who looked at the formula and she said, oh, but there's copper in it. And I have so many people who are copper toxic. And I thought, if Kyal put it in there, there's got to be a reason. And I didn't know if you put it in just to offset the zinc, because zinc and copper have such a synergistic relationship, as it were. But maybe you wanted to talk about the copper in there just a tiny bit. And it's not a ton. Like, I think it's,
No.
I can't remember, it's
equivalent of 1 milligram of copper per serving per 2 capsules. So it's not a ton. I think the ratio in the supplement of zinc to copper is 50 milligrams elemental zinc to 1 milligram elemental copper, which the ideal zinc to copper ratio in a supplement is 8-1. So there's far in excess more zinc than there is copper. Yeah. But the reason I added the copper to the formulation was it was sort of designed as a one and done, for maybe you take it for a month and then you're done for 4 months, because it's so high dosed. I sort of had the rationale that once you've used it, it's like anything, you only do it once every 6 months, once every 3 months, and then you'd be done with it. But a lot of people with IBDs, Crohn's, colitis, celiac disease as well, with that lorazepam, they would not stopping taking it, because as soon as they stopped taking it, their disease would flare up again. So for long-term use, 50 milligrams of zinc per day will result in zinc toxicity. So to sort of offset that, the copper was added there. Zinc carnosine as a form of zinc is sort of less inclined to lead to a overdose, because it sort of gets used locally in the stomach before it gets systemic and has that sort of the other effects for the immune system in the brain. But even still, it was just a balancing thing. There's not really much purpose to the zinc for gut healing. It's just in there to balance it out.
You mean the copper?
Yes. Oh, sorry. The copper. Yes. Yeah.
The zinc is pretty important.
Zinc has a big function. Yes, for sure.
Well, what I think a lot of people, we sometimes stop talking about, but I learned about this when I did my nutrition program also, is zinc is critical for helping people to make hydrochloric acid, which is your first line of defense in the gut. And so many people are deficient in as well. And
yeah, absolutely.
Part of this gut healing, like we have a tendency, or, a lot of people will have a tendency, oh, well, I got to cut my acid because I've got acid reflux. So therefore I'm making too much acid. And quite often it's the reverse problem is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Reflux is such a complicated thing. Like it also depends on what time you get that symptoms of reflux or gastrointestinal issues. If it's straight away, then you probably are deficient in hydrochloric acid. But if it's sort of like an hour or two later, then it might be something like SIBO, or it might be you don't have enough intrinsic factor or something like that. So it's such a complicated topic, gut health, but the zinc is just sort of like a no-fail ingredient to use. And I can't speak to overseas, but in Australia, there's no properly dosed formula of zinc carnosine. I think the highest that our regulatory bodies allow is 16 milligrams of zinc, and I've got 50 in it. So making sure that it's dosed properly is really important. And that's a big part of why Level Up exists, is everything needs to be dosed properly for it to work. I don't want people taking something and they're if they just follow the serving instruction, they're not getting, in Australia anyway, the right amount. So they're not getting the result that they expect, and they get frustrated with the ingredient or the product or the company. And that's the last thing I want. I don't want to rip people off or waste their time and their money with something that's not going to work. So I just turned everything up to 10 and make sure it's dosed exactly how it needs to be.
Yeah, no, and that is notable in your products for sure. I think that there's very few products out there that actually have, even the lorazepam, like there's a lot. What is it, a full milligram, or I can't remember.
Yeah, that's been scaled back in the reformulation with KPV to half a milligram. I revisited the literature when I reformulated it, and I found this sort of like a U-shaped curve to the dose, where 500 micrograms is like right in that sweet spot. And 1,000 was sort of, at the time, my mindset was more is better. But when I went back to it, I'm like, no, it's not. Instead of having that really high, because zonulin isn't is something that does contribute to leaky gut, but it also has a purpose. Like our body makes it. So it's making it for a reason. And if you're pushing it too high, then you're kind of overriding, like it's more pharmaceutical lorazepam than any of the other ingredients in pretty much all of peptides, because it's such a specific fragment of that zonulin occludens molecule. Yeah. It's so far removed from that, and it's not actually one that I think is made in the body compared to all the other peptides. It's one that they've had to synthesize from something. Oh, so the zonulin occludens molecule is made in the body, but yeah, it's a small fragment of that where they basically removed its ability to cause the transcription and the binding, the effects after the binding.
Okay. All right. So in your, so you said that you have a bunch of clients and friends who have serious gut issues that have used that formula. And so you have found, like, how long do people have to use it before they know? Because that's another thing with the peptides. I find that, you know, if they're going to do anything for you, that within a month you should, and quite often sooner, but you should within a month, if it's the right thing, if you've been properly diagnosed, you should start to feel some kind of benefit within a month of starting to use it. What have you found specifically, and especially with the more severe lower GI issues like the Crohn's, the colitis, the IBDs, that kind of stuff?
Well, a lot of people who take it long-term always want it on hand in case they get a flare. It's sort of like their rescue tool for a flare-up of their condition, of their autoimmune disease. It sort of it's so strong in its anti-inflammatory effect. It almost has a similar effect. For IBD, there's certain immunotherapies where the immunotherapy targets all these interleukins. Its purpose is to destroy them, essentially. But when you look at all the mechanisms of things like tributyrin, a form of butyrate, you look at BBC, all of these cytokines that are strongly associated with and tested for these diseases, the anti-inflammatory effects of the ingredients are directly targeting what mainstream medicine considers the problem. So rather than, I don't think interleukin 6 is the problem when it comes to IBD. It's sort of like a reactionary thing. It's trying to get the body to do something. Well, let's use a peptide to get it to do what it wants to do and heal that damn injury that you've got in your gut. Not destroy the immune system signaling. It's trying to help you, really. But yeah, that's sort of the main purpose for people with IBD, for flares, to keep it in remission. That's what most people use it for. The other subset of people who use it are not GI repair, but the regenerate formula. Heaps of people in gyms. I used to work at a gym and a supplement store, selling like pre-workouts and creatines and all that sort of stuff. And before I even had my own brand, I'd recommend, you got to look at this BPC stuff I heard on this podcast. And the amount of people I know who ended up trying to bring it in and getting it seized in customs in Australia. It's quite funny. They go like, Kyle, I tried it. It looks amazing. I ordered it, but customs won't let me have it. I'm like, oh man, I know that feeling. So that sort of frustration, I guess, with the inability to acquire these peptides was another driving force behind creating LVLUP and bringing it to the Australian market, because it's pretty difficult to get good stuff down here. I mentioned before to you, before we started the podcast, that I did a huge multi-$1,000 order with CanLab, and they just like, sorry, we can't send to Australia. It's just too difficult. So having my own brand to service the country and most of the Southern Hemisphere is just something that I really feel like needed doing. So
yeah, no, it's amazing. I have a lot of people in my group who are very happy to hear about you, because indeed, it's been a journey for them trying to get their hands on this stuff. Now, but you ship worldwide. Like you ship to me, you ship to someone I work with. Like, I mean, you don't just, lucky for the rest of us, you don't just keep it for yourselves down there.
Yeah. Well, I'd say about 95% of my my audience, my customers have been Australians, but I'm hoping that changes soon. I know it's
I think it will. I mean, I think there's just very, very few companies that have taken that initiative and that have formulated supplements with these ingredients that you've you've thrown in there, and really giving a nod to this idea of the peptides are amazing, and they're even more amazing when you put them together with synergistic,
Mm-hmm.
both other ingredients, and then also, as we were talking about earlier, the lifestyle changes, the diet changes, all of the other things that have to happen, especially, with a physical injury. Like if there's a biomechanical issue, yeah, the BPC and the P are going to be amazing for reducing inflammation and handling and managing the pain and maybe some degree of healing. But if you haven't actually fixed the biomechanical imbalance that's causing the injury in the first place, you're chasing your own tail. Like you're just going to end up supporting your company, but at the same time, you're just not in the end going to fix the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I can attest to that myself. Like I make the product and I have basically unlimited supply to it for gut healing. But 3 months ago, I moved house into one that was full of mold. And no matter how much GI repair and BPC I took, it just didn't work because the root cause wasn't addressed. I was living in a house that had Stachybotrys in levels higher than is safe for human life, really. So my health just went from 9, 10 out of 10 down to about a 1 in a period of 2 months. And similar to my story with the cancer obsession, no amount of stimulants or nootropic, no cerebrolysin or dihexa could save my brain from that aflatoxin that was messing up my hippocampus and my dopamine. It was just get to the root cause of things. Don't supplements and peptides and food is really good, but it's sort of, when I mentioned most upstream thing you can do, gut health is pretty far upstream, but environment is probably the most upstream, and that can just be at your house, EMFs, and relationships. So those are the big ones to get a handle on first.
Yeah, I love that. So what are your thoughts on EMF mitigation in your house? I mean, do you use special paint on your walls, have a canopy over your bed, and or do you feel like there's other ways for people to, or do you live like, kind of in this area where I spoke to a guy yesterday who lives in a house in the middle of 800 acres of land that he owns, so that, he's created this crazy buffer around himself, which is awesome if you can do it, but not, doesn't necessarily work for most of us.
I can firsthand attest to the damage that EMF does, because a big reason my mum's health deteriorated is she had breast cancer, but I feel like almost conclusively, we bet the breast cancer with all her bloods and her scans. And when we did that, we celebrated by moving house, and we moved, before I knew better, to a house that was about 50 meters away from a huge cell phone tower installment. And within 6 months, she developed brain cancer. Okay. She had the bedroom, if the tower is like a fire hydrant and the EMFs are the water, she was like directly that far away from the water spouting out. And every meter that we had to measure the EMFs was just maxing out, even ones that went up for like 5G range. It was just ridiculous. I had brain fog, like even mold brain fog's not fun, but EMF brain fog is not good at all. I believe it causes a rouleau effect in your red blood cells. And I just didn't feel like I ever had enough oxygen. And I passed out, and my sister had tingling all over her body, and poor mum's health deteriorated faster than I've ever seen it when we lived in that. Yeah. But strategies for avoiding it, for living with it, if you're in that, like I went down the route of Blue Shield and all of these devices like that. And I really, I'm very biochemistry focused, and I couldn't really get my head around how that was working. So I just looked at the voltage gated calcium channel mechanism. And that's why my brain stocks magnesium 3 and 8. When it came to EMFs, I wanted to balance that calcium efflux that occurs when you're in a high EMF environment with the most bioavailable form of magnesium. And the place where I wanted that effect was my brain, because I needed to figure my way out of the situation where we're in with that EMF. And if your brain goes down, it's sort of like you're without a paddle. So that was a huge one for me. It lifted a lot of the brain fog. PEA was great for that too. PEA is, as I mentioned before, a strong anti-inflammatory, but it also has a strong affinity for the brain and for the heart, because it itself is a fatty acid. And these two organs are very fat loving. The heart runs on fats and ketones, and the brain's also pretty similar in its fuels. So the PEA was great for that effect as well. But also things like methylene blue, that really helped a lot too. Methylene blue worked on the mechanism of the peroxynitrate free radical that occurs. I think it's Martin Paul, Professor or Dr. Martin Paul, put this mechanism forward with the voltage-gated calcium channels causing the peroxynitrate radical, which, sorry to get too technical for your listeners, but basically it inhibits oxygen utilization at the mitochondrial level. And the things that we used to kick it off were methylene blue and red light therapy. So those were my life jackets while we lived in that environment. But where I live now is on about 1.5 acres, really far away from neighbors and no big towers around. My only prerequisite is just don't live near a tower, and you just go on a site map and make sure you're not within 500 meters. And I don't stress too much about it if that metric is met.
Yeah, no, and that, you know, I mean, it's becoming a little harder to achieve these days, but definitely it's good advice. It's good advice. And I actually do have another podcast episode coming up with, you mentioned Scott Scher earlier about hyperbaric oxygen, but we're recording another podcast all about methylene blue in the next little while.
Awesome. Him and his colleague, Ted Achacoso, they're two great people to talk to. If you've not spoke to Ted.
I have. I mean, I haven't had a podcast yet, but I've met him a couple of times, and I'm definitely hoping to get him on the podcast as well in the next little while. But yeah, and another really incredible source. Now, when you also said that you dealt with mold for a short period of time, a short and intense period of time. Did you find anything through that, or did you end up having to detox from mold once you got out of the house? I mean, obviously getting out of the house is job one, but then for some people, you know, and it's interesting, I think there's some genetics involved here and maybe other underlying issues, but for some people, that's not enough. Once they've had that exposure, their body hangs on to it almost, and getting it out of the system is actually a job in and of itself.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty stubborn with health, and I also like challenges. So the house we lived in was honestly one of the most beautiful views I'd ever seen in my life, and we got to live in it. So I really didn't want to let go of that. We were renting, so we had the luxury of breaking our bond and leaving, but I wanted to beat it. I didn't like that it was ruining our life and making us unhappy. So I essentially threw like $20,000 at it. I bought a dehumidifier for every room, a 5-stage HEPA filter. We did saunas, and the unfortunate reality of it was like all the supplements in the world, all of the Cellcore line, all of the binders, liver support, it just didn't really make a dent while we were living in such high amounts. All of the mitigation, we had a building biologist come in, and they did a patchwork, but they said the house is so extensively molded that behind the wall that has been painted over is just completely riddled with it. The moisture content in the wood as well was up 40%. And for people's reference, it needs to be below 10%. So it was essentially the whole house was a petri dish for this mold to just thrive. And no matter what I did, it didn't really make a difference. And the gut issues that came from that, and the brain fog issues, and then the mental health issues too. Like people do speak about it, but I'd never really felt mental health issues in my life until we were living in that. Just the frustration and no motivation. Its effect on dopamine and the hippocampus is just so strong that I hated myself when we're in that, because I'm just like, what is wrong with you? Why can't you get to work? Why can't you work out? And getting out of that was the big thing. And unfortunate reality for people, if their house is riddled with it, you do need to spend the money to remediate it, get it out. And then furniture as well. We tried to bring all of our furniture from that house to our new one, and piece by piece, we've had to just dispose of it. We tried to rescue it, salvage it with all the essential oils, all of the mold killing products, but anything that's porous, it was no good. Yeah.
Well, the other thing with mold is I actually recorded and published a podcast with, his name is Jason Earl, and he's a great guy. And he also has quite a journey with mold. But one of the things he talks about is it's not just the live mold you have to worry about. Even dead mold off gas,
Mm.
right? So they produce, like, even when the mold itself is technically dead, it's still a problem. Like, it's still,
Spores.
unfortunately, I think in a house that's that infested, you almost have to start over.
Well, the other issue too is when we got the remediator in and they started doing work, it's sort of like you've stirred it up now, and it's probably the issue is going to be 5 times worse. And that trajectory of health just went so much faster downhill when that happened, unfortunately. So I'd say the house is now condemned. We put in a full complaint with our real estate agents and stuff like that. So no longer an issue, but happily we are out of it now and have been detoxing with saunas and citrus pectin and all of the binders we could find and liver support, things like my product Tudka. You've dealt with Tudka before or heard of it?
Yeah, I've heard of Tutka. I've used it. You can, by all means, talk about it, because I think it's one of the great unsung heroes of liver support. People talk about milk thistle and all the things, but Tutka, I don't think gets enough attention. So maybe you want to talk about that a little bit. Sure.
Oh, it definitely doesn't get enough attention. And when I first used it years ago with my mum for that liver support when she was going through all those toxic therapies, and the amount of toxic waste that was dumped when you open up that phase 3 liver detox, the bile flow with the Tudka was one part disgusting, one part amazing. And that same effect happened to me when we got out of this mold. When we began our detoxification process, I was high dosing Tudka at 2 grams a day at one stage. And for about 5 days, nothing happened. And I'm like, oh goodness, this is quite backed up. And then on the 6th day, it was just one mother of a movement. I'll put it that way to spare your listeners the gross details of it. But it just getting out that toxic sludge, that thickened bile that happens when you just have that buildup of toxicity from whatever cause it might be. In my case, mold, was pretty profound. So
Tutka acts on the liver, or I thought it was on the liver. It acts on the gallbladder as well. Like, it acts on the bladder.
yeah, it's protective in the liver, yeah, but its main mechanism is just a thinning of the bile. When the liver is really toxic, the bile thickens quite a lot with all of these bound conjugated toxins. And this happens with bodybuilders. It's really big in the bodybuilding community with their oral steroid use. Is it causes what's called cholestasis, which is stagnation of the bile. And Tudka is a water soluble bile acid, so it thins it, gets it flowing. The analogy that I use is it's like if you've got a dirty bathtub, Tudka pulls the plug from the sink and just gets stuff moving out of it. You definitely synergize it with phase 2 support, like your N-acetylcysteines and things like milk thistles, a bit of phase 1 and phase 2 as well. But Tudka was just, with that thinning effect, it's exactly what I needed for my detoxification. But the other effect that it had too was actually energy, which is not a direct mechanism. But when you clear that liver of all of the toxic sludge, it functions so much better. And for my thyroid T4 is converted to T3 in the liver. And I just got this huge stimulant like boost in energy when that was all cleared after that 6th day. That it's really good stuff. And it's a bit gross for people who try it the first time. And when that dumping occurs, you can get some really strong Herxheimer die-off reactions. When that toxicity hits your gut bacteria, they're not particularly happy about it either. So you can definitely get some bloating and some side effects on that end, but it's a really powerful ingredient that I love. And it's behind the BPC products. It's a leading product that we sell with LVLUP too.
Yeah. So your Tudka, is it, I don't think I looked at it as extensively. Is it just the Tudka, or does it include some of those other synergistic ingredients as well?
I've just finalized a liver complex, which doesn't have Tudka. It'll be paired with Tudka. The Tudka I sell now is just 500 milligrams per capsule of pure Tudka. Pure nail polish varnish is what it smells like.
Nice. Lovely. Well, but the nice thing about that is you can titrate it up or down, right? So I think that's it's the best, in a way. It's one of the best ways to provide a supplement like that, because some people may not need as much. I mean, as you said, two grams a day is a lot, but if that's what you needed to move the needle, then that's what you got to do what you got to do. So
Exactly.
So other than the BPC and the lorazepam, do you have other plans for other peptide supplements coming down the pipes? Or, I mean, you're not a guy that's going to rest on your laurels for too long.
No, I'm definitely with potential regulatory things. I'm moving into cosmetics. I know you've had guests who have some formulas for hair growth, and what's the company's name for the skincare that you've been? What was that one? Sorry?
Young Goose.
Young Goose, yeah. So products similar to theirs, again, for the Australian market, but also globally, are what I'm bringing out now, using different forms as well. Like I'm really excited about the PAL GHK instead of the GHK-Cu form. It's a palmital group bound to the GHK. And that's shown to have better absorption than it by itself with the it bound to copper. There's a lot of these iterations of the GHK, and there's ones that are even called AHK that are really interesting to me at the moment. And we're doing a lot of research and development with my manufacturer on some topicals. We've got an anti-aging serum with, it's going to be AHK and GHK based. We're also going to put BPC as the acetate form in it because I don't think it matters topically for arginate.
Yeah.
And then just, again, similar to the other formulations that I've got with LVLUP, just combining it with all the best that's already out there, like your hyaluronic acids. And I am drawing a blank as to the other ones that we're putting in there. But yeah, lots of really great naturals combined with that. But then also, and again, formulating sort of comes via necessity for me. Formulated 2 years ago, hair regrowth formula for a friend of mine who had androgenic alopecia. She was a female. And that one is finally, after 2 long years of sitting on the shelf, in development as well. And that'll have things like your zinc thymolin as the main base to that one, but also the palmital GHK peptide in that. We're looking at the PTD-DBM, but don't feel like that's a viable peptide because of stability and refrigeration. But we're doing our best to bring out products that work, and not just the peptides. Again, like when you look at hair loss, targeting the DHT, targeting circulation, targeting prostaglandins, and all those sort of inflammatory processes, and even fungal infections as well. There'll be antifungals, immune modulating herbs in it as well. Just trying our best to address problems that actually aren't being addressed properly in the market yet.
So you're talking about the antifungals as a function of hair regrowth, or you're talking about antifungals on their own?
As like a primer phase for the hair regrowth. A lot of hair loss can be attributed to fungal overgrowth within the hair follicle, which sort of creates a state of inflammation from the outside in, and that can inhibit the hair growth as well. So that's another pathway we're looking at.
Interesting. And sorry, I wanted to ask you about the PAL GHK. So tell me a little bit about that. So used more as a topical?
Yeah, I mean, similar to the GHK CU, as a topical, its absorption's great.
Yeah. Use almost more of a topical ingredient than it is systemic.
Yeah, exactly. So sort of looking at that one, because again, I feel like in the market, there's plenty of people who are using the GHK-Cu and it works great. But if there's like a new iteration of these peptides that might work better, then again, similar to why I don't use acetate for BPC, I want to use what is potentially the best form. And it has all the same mechanisms of GHK. I believe the GHK is still the active part of the compound that elicits the benefits of like wrinkling and tightening and collagen networks and all that sort of stuff. But the palmital group, just increasing its absorption even more, is interesting. And I believe from a cost perspective, it's not too much more either to synthesize. So.
Nice. All right. Wow. So this is the PAL GHK is more of your topical for the anti-aging, and then for the hair formula, would it be the same one, or is that the AHK?
We're going to play around with it. We're really going to we still are in testing, not even in testing phase. It hasn't been created yet. It's still in the lab getting tweaked by our manufacturers. But once it's out there, we're going to have different iterations and we're going to test, like if there's no difference using the GHK-Cu versus the palmitoyl AHK, then for that cost difference, we might as well just go back to what's being used for the result. So it's just things that are exciting and that really tickling my fancy when it comes to just experimenting and pushing the envelope. So that's sort of what we're doing with that. But also with the anti-aging one, using those Botox-like peptides like arginine and the Phrasal, those will be in it too. And similar to how Regen has something that works immediately with the PEA for an analgesic effect, and then the BPC works in the back end, we're sort of using that same mindset of we want something that has an immediate result and you can see the benefits straight away if you put it on. And then you've got the peptides working in the background for sort of like long-term regeneration of the cells. So that's the mechanism for that anti-aging. So hopefully it works well.
All right.
Be sending some out to you to try if you'd like.
I'm just bring it. Because, there's no point in using it testing it on a 30-year-old. Really, you want to test it on someone who actually needs it. So.
You can have my doses.
Well, you'll have other stuff. Okay, well, this is amazing. So yeah, I think the hair formula, definitely people will be keeping their ears peeled for that, because that is one issue that, I mean, there's a lot of people trying to crack that nut, and with varying degrees of success. I feel like we're on the cusp. I feel like people are definitely making headway. Like for us, Khan, who I had on the podcast, has a really nice formula that seems to be very helpful. I know Ian Mitchell had.
Yeah, I did listen to that episode.
Pardon?
I did listen to that episode with him, and I was just very blown away because I'd already started the R&D when I heard that. I'm like, wow, this guy knows what he's doing with their formulation. That's awesome.
Yeah, and he's now gone back to the drawing board also. He's got a new one coming down the pipes that I think he's just going into testing with. So awesome. I think with all you guys that are kind of, like I love this community of people who are just willing to look at things outside what's conventional, right? And not afraid to use things that might not be obvious to other people, or maybe are obvious, but I'm trying to understand, like, what's the delivery mechanism? Is it actually getting to where it needs to go? And one of the things that Faraz does, which I'm sure you'll do as well, is he's got an oral supplement that goes with it, because you're going at the problem from different angles, like not just a scalp issue, and especially with male pattern baldness. Like, it's not just it's definitely in the scalp, but it's also a gut issue. It's also, how are you converting your hormones? What's happening at a biochemical level that's driving this from the inside?
It's a very intelligent program that he has with the oral supplement, the primer, and then the main one as well. So I love that multiple companies are doing this. I'm not in any competition. There's that many people in the world who need peptides, who need products to heal. We're not going to be cutting each other's markets, or there's plenty of people who need the products to go around for companies. So I'd love to reach out and work with them on that sort of thing. And
yeah, well, I think two minds are better than one. Three is better. Like, it's, you get this hive mind thing going on. And I do think, it's a bit of a race. Obviously, everybody wants to be the guy that solves the problem, as it were. But at some level, as you say, with more companies getting into this, everybody's learning from everybody else. And it's a big market out there. So it's not, there'll be no shortage of customers.
Exactly. And podcasts are the great accelerator for this this renaissance of scientific information. It's amazing. Shows like yours and Ben Greenfield's and all the ones that catalyzed my journey into health are just, we're so blessed to have them and keep creating the content. You're doing a huge service to humanity with these. So thank you to you, Nat. And as a listener of your show, I get so much from them, as well as all of your members of your Facebook group do. So you're doing an amazing thing with the podcast. And thank you. My praise to you.
Well, thank you, and back at you, because I think you're doing some incredible work here. So I think we're going to probably wrap this up, because you need to go to bed, and and I think we've covered a lot of ground, more importantly, and we can always have another conversation down the road when you've brought a few more of these magical formulas into being and let people know about them. But is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with? Any parting words, and also how to find you, reach you, and buy your products?
Yeah, well, I hope the products that I'm working on actually work. I've just spoken about them for 15 minutes. If they turn out to be duds, then oh well, sorry for wasting your time.
It's a conversation, right? What you haven't done is put products out on the market that waste people's money, right? We learn from spending time talking about these things. By the time you put a product out to market, I think people can be pretty confident that it's there for a reason because it works.
And not wasting people's money or time is, as I said, the huge ethos behind the company. Every peptide we use is university studied and tested to be exactly what we've asked for. So there's no issues like I had when I got into peptides with questioning whether it's actually the right peptide. And it certainly happened with things that I bought like cerebrolysin, where I felt nothing from some random company that I bought from UK or wherever in the world. So parting words, I don't know. I need some help for winding down, potentially some biohacks for winding down before bed once I'm in this sympathetic dominant state that I'm in. That maybe you can help me with. Huh?
Are you asking for some?
Yeah, sure. Give me some advice. I'll chuck the blue blockers on as soon as I'm finished with this podcast.
Yeah. Well, I think the blue blockers and a little bit of, I don't even know that I would take any supplements. I think I would do some breath work and it's going to be about shutting your brain off, right?
Mm-hmm. All right. Shouldn't be too hard after the day I've had, but thanks anyway. Ways people can find me is LVLUP Health. Instagram's probably where I'm most active because I'm a millennial. At LVLUP Health. If you want to message me on there, that's better than email. I get so many emails a day. I'm sorry for people who contact and I take a day or two to get back to, but the website is leveluphealth.com, www.leveluphealth.com. And yeah, that's how you can reach me, how you can find me and my products.
And we have a discount code for people, right? Was it NAT10? I know I've given it to people in the group.
Yeah, it's NAT10. I've definitely seen you giving it out in the group and appreciate you not promoting, but talking about the product in the group. It's been great to see the influx of Canadian and American orders from your group. So
yeah,
I appreciate you for that and your group for taking the chance on my Australian company and risking the import, the customs, and then the shipping stuff can be a little bit of a thing that you need to worry about sometimes, but we've never had real issues with sending from Australia to abroad. So
yeah, no, that's amazing. And guys, for LVLUP Health, it's level up just without the E's. So, which is actually brilliant. It reads beautifully. Your brain fills in the E's right away. So
little tip, head nod to gamers out there, anyone who plays video games. That's sort of the name came from.
Nice. All right. Well, Kyal, thank you so much. Have a nice wind down. Take a bunch of that magnesium, maybe your magnesium threonate. I think that might help you. And and we will talk again. This has been a total pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and for staying up late for me. Next time we'll do it the other way around. You'll get up early and I'll stay up late.
I don't know which one I prefer. On that end, I can take stimulants and caffeine, but on this end, I get to go to sleep straight away after. I'm not sure. Either way, thank you, Nat. Thanks for having me, and thank you to your audience for listening.
Likewise. Thank you.